Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me again. Here it is, lesson 11 from the Spring Security Fundamentals playlist, and here is mostly where the things start to become different than the previous Spring Security playlist, because we will start discussing about OAuth 2, and a lot of things changed in the OAuth 2, especially what we are going to start discussing today, which is the authorization server. So if you're watching the event live, don't forget that you have a live chat there, so you can ask the questions in the live chat. If you are watching the event recorded, you can leave your comments, leave your questions in the comment section, and you can of course follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn and see what I'm posting there as well. With that being said, I'm going to suppose that you already saw lesson 9 where we discussed what OAuth 2 is, and I'm going to start directly today working on an authorization server. So in case you don't know what OAuth 2 is, and things like grant types, authorization code with PXE, client credentials, resource server, if these notions sound strange to you, sound awkward, you didn't hear them, you didn't hear about them, and you don't know what they are, then my suggestion is first go to lesson number 9 and understand what OAuth 2 is before jumping into how to build this component, which is the authorization server, which if you don't know what OAuth 2 is in general, you won't most likely understand what it is and why do we build it. So I'm going to again jump in the code, and I'm going to write the simplest example, and then probably in the next lessons I will show you more things, like for example how to customize the tokens and stuff like that. We have a lot of things that we can discuss about, but let's start with the beginning. So how do we create an authorization server? Previously, and if you will watch my 2020 playlist, you will see me using the Spring Security OAuth library, which is now deprecated, so we don't use that anymore. Now we have a separate framework in the Spring ecosystem that allows us to create an authorization server, and that's what we will use today and of course throughout this playlist, which is the new recommended way. Its version 1.0.0 has just been released in November this year, so what we discuss here is quite very hot. You might find me not knowing all the things already about it, because I didn't have I didn't even have the chance to use it in production yet. So everything I know by simply studying the framework itself, the documentation, working a bit on it myself, but I didn't use it in production yet. That's because it's very new. Okay, so in case you see I don't know things and things don't go the way they should be, is because I'm not really very prepared into this framework. But let's actually try to use it. So you can see version 1.0 has been released on the 21st of November, so not so long ago, and this is what we will use to create our authorization server and test it today with the most used grant type, which is the authorization code grant type. That's what we are going to use to prove that our application works. So I'm going to create a new project. Here it is. It's Spring Security 2022. This is C11, and the first example, but I don't think we will have more than one. Anyway, so you can see I'm using Java 17, and I'm forced to do that as long as I at least want to use Spring Boot 3, and I promise to use Spring Boot 3 because it's the latest version that has been released, and it's very hot and very essential to understand for our future applications. So what do we actually need? Spring Boot 3, and I at least need to add the web dependency, because you see the authorization server has to have a login interface if I want to use the authorization code, and the simplest way to create it is maybe using a web form, which is out of the box with Spring Security, because I only need to call the form login, and of course you can customize it later, but that's not what we are going to do today. So I won't have to add Spring Security because it comes out of the box, I think, with the new dependency, and I'm going to create my project, and of course I will have to copy this dependency from here into my pom.xml file. Why didn't I add it right now is because, again, version 1 has just been released, so Spring Boot doesn't yet know about the new authorization server framework, so you will not find it directly in the start Spring IO. You have to add it afterwards. So look, here it is on my other screen. I will bring it on the main one so you can see it. I'm going to pom.xml. I can see I have the starter web here, and I will copy the Spring Security Authorization Server version 1.0.0, and then of course, as usual, I'm going to say right click Maven. Okay, it didn't add as a Maven project, now it did, and Maven reload project. And now you should basically sync and get everything that we need. And once this is synced, now I can basically start writing the configuration class, which is very simple. So everything you do is by configurations. So I'm just going to add the config package here, and in the config package, let's create a class security config. And in the security config class, if we really want it to be a configuration class, of course, we have to annotate it with that configuration. And then I need to add at least a couple of security filter beans if I want to have the minimum authorization server. So let's start by saying public security filter chain. We will call it authorization server security filter chain. And to add it as a bean in the context, I'm going to use the bean annotation. And of course, as a parameter, I'm going to inject the HTTP security bean from the context, because that's what I'm going to use to build the filter chain. So that's how you build the filter chain. You call the build method at the end. But before returning, of course, you will add your configurations. Now, we have a couple of beans, and most likely one of them will have to be self-configured at some point by Spring Boot, but at the moment that's not what happens. So you need to place an order, and the first one should always be the authorization server one, and then you will have a second one which will be the applications, the application security filter chain. So I will create a second one in the chain. So now I have a chain of 2 filters. The first one is for the authorization server, the second one is for the application. In the one for the application, most likely what we are going to do, HTTP, what we are going to do is just configure the form login. I won't customize it now, I'm just configuring the defaults, and then you say authorize HTTP request, any request, authenticated, to make sure that all the links by default require authentication. So that's everything for this filter. And then what we are going to do here is configure the minimum for the authorization server. Fortunately, we have a class that helps us already apply all the defaults. And this is again going to be auto-configured in Spring Boot in the next versions, but for the moment you have to manually call this static method and provide as a parameter the HTTP security bean. And then of course, if you want to configure further, because in most cases you want to change this default configuration, what you can do is say HTTP get configurer, and then the configurer OAuth2 configuration. Configure, what happens here? Oh, this is it, fine. And then say just the simplest one. Let's say you want to have OpenID connect enabled, the new authorization server also provides you the possibility to have OpenID Connect over OAuth2. So if you want to do that, the simplest way is just enable OpenID Connect, and then you can customize it using a customizer. But again, in this lesson at least, I'm going to use all the defaults possible so that you can focus on the main things rather than details that would take you out of the main road that we are discussing here. So do I have to do anything else? Yes, if I'm going to use the authorization code grant type, then I want to make sure one thing is that if someone tries to call something that any URL that's protected and it doesn't yet have an authentication in the security context, which means they didn't yet authenticate, then I have to redirect them to the login page, because the reason I've added this form login configuration here, which you already know hopefully from the previous lessons, is because I want to have a form login configured by default by Spring Security. So this authentication method that I can configure via the DSL method form login creates a default page with a username and a password. So that's why I want when something goes wrong, like someone tries to call an endpoint but it's not authenticated yet, they should be redirected in the login page, which by default is /login. So how do I say something like that? It's something like HTTP exception handling, and then we say for E we want an authentication entry point of type login. So this automatically will cause a redirect to the login page, which is by default /login, since I didn't customize anything here, in case the user doesn't have yet an authentication. So they will be basically forced to log in, which is what we expect. We expect that when we call the /authorize endpoint, the authorization server is shows the form, the login form, where the user can input their credentials, username and password, and then the authorization server will redirect back to the client with the authorization code, and then you can take the authorization code and call the token endpoint. If this flow doesn't sound familiar, go to lesson number 9. Review lesson number 9. We discussed all about this authorization code flow with diagrams in lesson number 9. Okay. If this sounds familiar, then you can stay with me here and you can see the flow up to the end. And now let's take it from the very beginning. You need users and you need password encoder. That's because the authorization server manages users, yeah, as we discussed in lesson 9. So you need a user detail service for sure. So let's plug in the simplest user detail service. I won't complicate the things. I will use an in-memory user details manager, because in the end you can get, based on all the lessons from 1 to this one, that you can customize your user detail service and plug it in as any other user detail service. And in one of the previous lessons of this playlist, you have already seen me creating a JPA user detail service where I have been using Hibernate to connect to a database. And I already explained you that this is just an interface and you can simply implement it and define the load user by username method the way you want. So the same you can do here for this authorization server. And so for me, it should simply be user details service, new in-memory user details manager. I will simply create a user. So I should say u1 user with username, user, password, whatever, at least one authority, and then of course build it. And I should actually in the latest versions be able to return this directly and add the user like this. And then of course we need the password encoder. And for now I will continue using in my demonstrations the no-op password encoder, which you should remember it's striked out for a reason, is because it's only for demonstrations, because it doesn't hash the password. So you should never use the no-op password encoder in a real world app. Let me see some questions now. So Thank you very much for your appreciations. I will skip over them, but I saw them. Can you show in one of the files the backend for front-end pattern? Yes, that's architectural, so I will show it in a different stream, maybe in a different video. Can I have both access token and refresh token endpoints that way without having a form login redirect? I'm not sure I understand your question. So what is the access token endpoint? Actually, there is no /access token endpoint in the OAuth2 specification, as per which I recall. The access token and the refresh token, they are both of them returned in the /token response, so you only have one endpoint. I might be wrong, but last time when I read the OAuth2 specification and the OpenID Connect specification, there were not two endpoints. So in case you want to create 2 endpoints, maybe you can customize that, but I think we cannot consider it to be according to the specification. So I would simply recommend you not to do that. Do we need to set matchers in HTTP security configurations? If you want, it's now the request matcher as I presented in lesson 10. You can do that if you need, but now simply if in the simplest demonstration I do here, I only need to have everything authenticated. I just used any request. But yes, if you really want, you can use the request matchers the same way as you do with any other application. Cool. So what else? So I have prepared my filters and I have prepared my user management. Now I need clients, so I need to have a registered client repository for that. So I have registered client repository bin in the context, and I define a register client. And I will create a register client using the builder. Let's give it a random ID actually. And then what we need is to set the public ID and the secret. We call it the client ID. So client ID, client, secret, and there is a minimum of configurations we need to have here, at least scope. Since I'm using OpenID Connect, I am able to add any of the scopes. By the way, you can add multiple scopes if you want, like this. For example, and you can use other scopes as well, but make sure that if you want to use the OpenID Connect scopes, you have firstly enabled OpenID Connect in the configuration the way we did here, otherwise it will not work most likely. Then we need redirect URIs. So again, you can add multiple redirect URIs if you want. Let's just use, I have here my tab with Spring 1. So let's just use Spring 1. Why not say Spring 1 authorized? Okay. And then we need an authentication method. I do recommend you continue using at least HTTP basic. You can of course avoid if you want using at all, so you can put none and then you will not use anything, but I do recommend you use some kind of authentication, to simplest being using basic in this case. And let me see, what else do I need and maybe forgot here. So the grant types, of course, I at least need to specify the grant type that I want to use. And again, you can use multiple grant types. So for example, if I want to use the refresh token grant type, I can do something like this. So you can call the authorization grant type method as many times as you want here. Is it anything else that I must add? Most likely I would say no. So if that's the case, of course I can add token settings, client settings, but they are not mandatory. So let's keep them for the time being, and just return a new in-memory register client repository with only this client. It should be more than enough for our demonstrations. Going back to my live stream here. So that and the other. Fine. I think the only thing I'm missing now is a bin of type authorization server settings. So I'm adding a bin of this type in the context, but again, I'm just going to use the default. So if you would need, for example, to change the URLs, they are the defaults, you know, /authorize /token, but you can change them. So if you want to change them, what you can do is use this bin. I won't do this because it doesn't make sense for the moment, and usually you don't need it. But again, if you want to, for example, have a different JWK set endpoint, a different issuer, a different user info endpoint, a different token endpoint, a different authorization, of course, you can do that simply by changing them in the authorization server settings bin. So that's why this bin is here. And I think this is at least the minimum that we need to configure. The minimum being we don't now customize our JVT. By default, we use a JVT because I've enabled also the OpenID Connect. So if I follow the flow correctly, I should be able to demonstrate that my authorization server here produces an access token of type JVT at the end. But I don't customize it. Probably in the next lesson, I will show you how to customize it as well. So let me see if this works fine. I need to run it. First of all, see if it starts. And in case I didn't miss anything from my configuration, I should be able to run the authorization code flow. That means I will first run in the browser the authorized endpoint. I will log in, I will get an authorization code, and then I can call the token endpoint in Postman. So, okay, my app started, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, and because I'm very lazy, I have prepared in advance the links. So you see, I'm going to my localhost 8080, which is the authorization server I created. /auth/authorize is the default path for the authorization server. Then I have the response type code, which means that I'm telling the authorization server I'm using the authorization code run type. Client ID client, that should match with what I configured here. This is mine. Okay. Going back, sorry. Scope, which should be one of the scopes that I have configured. Redirect URI, it should match. So HTTPS Spring 1IO authorized. HTTPS Spring 1IO authorized, okay, it matches. Going back. And then code challenge. I have explained at some point how to create a challenge and a verifier in one of the videos. It's for Pixie. So I'm using here not only the authorization code, but I'm using the authorization code with Pixie. And then the challenge method is S256. That means that this challenge is the SHA-256 hash, so encoding of the verifier. So if this is fine, I'm redirected to the form login. This is the default configured form login, and then user and password, and I'm signing in. And when I'm signing in, of course, Spring 1 doesn't have this page. That makes sense, but look in the URL here, we got the code, okay? So we got the authorization code. So normally, of course, the client application would have that page and will know what to do with this code. We don't have the client application now, and we don't write the client application. Anyway, it wouldn't be my job as a backend developer to write a client application. But importantly, the authorization server works correctly. It redirected us back, and it provided what we consider to be a valid authorization code, and we will validate immediately if this is or not a valid authorization code just by going into Postman and in Postman we will use this time the token endpoint. So again, there are a few parameters you have to set, including the client, the redirect URI, the kind of grant type. The code is what I'm going to paste here. It's what I've copied from my browser. Be very attentive, this code is only usable once. Even if you send a request that hasn't been accepted, the code is consumed, which means you can't use this code twice. Even if the request didn't work, it will be consumed. So if I send now the request and for any reason, my fault, for some reason it doesn't work, I have to regenerate the authorization code. I cannot reuse this one because it does consume itself at the first request, whether it's or not successful. Okay, that's to keep in mind. And of course, the code verifier is what we have hashed to become the challenge. If it's not clear what this is, again, take a look back in lesson number 9 where we discussed authorization code with Pixie. You have the challenge and the verifier. The verifier is a random 32-bit string, and the challenge is a hash over the verifier. In our case, you saw the hash method was S256. That means that the code you have seen there is the SHA-256 hash of this string here. So now if everything is fine, and I'm going to click send, and oh, you see something happened. So I did something wrong. That's fine, it happens. Again, I'm not an expert in this authorization server framework yet, but it tells me the token failed to generate the access token for some reason. Okay, the idea is now, as I said, the authorization code can't be used anymore, so I really have to re-go through the entire flow. And I have no idea why this failed for me here. Maybe we can find something in the logs, I don't know. Oh, we don't. But the idea is that that's not working now for this reason. So it doesn't tell us a lot of things. Only that token generator failed to generate the access token, which is very unfortunate. I will check at least, and maybe it was a good point at the beginning to check if this works for us. It's very simple. It's very simple what happened. I forgot something, of course. I did forget something. If you use JWTs, which happens by default here, well, you need keys. You cannot sign a token, and the JWT needs to be signed by default. It's mandatory to be signed, which means I need to have a pair of asymmetric keys, public-private keys. And if I don't have that, then of course it doesn't work. So what I'm missing here is the keys, and theoretically I should be able to see if I'm sending a request to the JWK. As you see, it fails. This is actually it shows me the form login because of the redirect I made at the beginning, but that means something is failing here. I should have got back the key pairs that I configured in my server, but I don't get them back because, well, I didn't configure them. So let's see, how do we configure some key pairs so we make our server work fully up to the end. So I need to create a JWK source of security context. If I correctly remember, this is the JWK source, and here I think they created at some point the immutable JWK set, which is an implementation of the JWK source. So we should be able to actually return this in the end. But of course we need to provide something. So when you create this, you need to provide the key set. So let's create the key set. and that's not enough yet, because as you can see now this set is empty. So I'm not even sure if it's working. I might try if I restart to see if I see any change in the response from the key set. But anyway, still I need to create a key. So I'm going to jump in creating a key. So meanwhile, while map is restarting, Jordan, can you make a security series, please? REST security series. What would that be different than what I'm doing here, if I may? So this Spring Security that's one of the reasons for why you use it, is to secure REST endpoints. Is it something else that I'm missing here? Anyway, so I need a key. I need a key. So I'm going to use. I think I should actually do something like this. Or maybe try to throw the exceptions. Let me see, I don't know. So anyway, key pair generator. So let's just try to simply use Java security for that. Key pair generator, key pair generator, get instance, and we can use RSA. So again, I was going to add a try with the try catch for this exception here, but maybe we can simply just do like this for our demonstration, because it's not important. And then you get the generate key pair generator, generate key pair. Before generating the key pair, we should specify the length of the key. And then we get the key pair here, key pair. And then you do need an RSA public key. And I don't think there is another choice here than casting it. So you just say from the key pair, get the public key, and then you do the same here from the private RSA private key pair, get private, and then you need to create an RSA key new RSA key builder, and I think this takes the private key as a parameter, no, the public key, sorry, I always forget that. And then you say with the private key, you need at least a key ID to provide, so we can add a random key ID, and then build. And the only key we added to a key set, and that's it. Okay, and then I'm restarting it, and meanwhile I'm taking the next question. For a REST API, which grant type would you use? Refresh token. So refresh token, as the name suggests, is to refresh a token that you already have. So what I would be using is first the authorization code, with PXE preferably. And then, of course, I would enable the refresh token, because in most applications where you use a REST, especially if you have a front end, then you need a refresh token to be able to refresh the token. So it would be the authorization code and then plus the refresh token. But Eugenio, in case you didn't see lesson number 9, that's where I explain what OAuth2 is. And it's very important to understand what access token is and refresh token before trying to build a system. So I would recommend, if you didn't see that lesson yet, you can watch it. And of course, I do recommend everyone go and watch the lessons. If this is the first time you are here, this is the lesson 11, which means there are 10 other lessons before this one. So you will most likely not properly understand what I'm saying here if you don't have all the pieces of details from behind. So if you feel you need some refresh on this information or you don't know it, you can always go back and see all the lessons to make sure that you have all the pieces of the puzzle that you can put together. Otherwise you might find it difficult. Cool. So now I have a key source, which means I have a key pair, I have the public private key, I put them in a pair, I put them in the set. You can have more than one. In reality, you would have more than one because you would like to have key rotations as well. And then I've returned my bean. I restarted the application, and now I should be able to go back to Postman. Different life, isn't it? So we have a set of keys. We don't have an error anymore. So we can see the set of keys. It's only one key here, type RSA. It has a key ID, which is a random unique identifier, because that's what we wanted. And this is the public key. What you see here is the public key. We'll find out in the next lessons when we discuss about the resource server that this is what the resource server uses to validate the token. So now I can actually go back, and I will have, again, remember, the authorization code, it's only usable once. So I really need to come back and remake the entire flow. So where was it? This one. I'm going to say again, user, password, sign in, get the code, go to Postman, add the code, send the request, and here it is, an access token. I also get a refresh token since I added the refresh token grant types. That's what you will usually have with a client, here, whether it is a web application or a mobile app or even a desktop application, it will be a client. And we can just even take this one and see how it looks like if you decode it with base64. So JVT.io is a very nice tool where you can do that. Just go here and you see key ID is the ID of the key pair that has been used to sign this token. The blue part is the signature. Remember that a JVT token has three parts. One of them is the header, the second one is the body, and the third one is the signature. You can see them, they are decoded here. So this is a base64 encoding of this JSON here. This is a base64 encoding of this JSON here. And this is of course a signature, which is a binary detail created with a cryptographic algorithm. In our case, we used RSA. We will learn in the next lessons how you can customize this. But anyway, we will go deeper into how this works in the whole with the whole thing when we reach the resource server, because now I'm telling you, like I did in lesson 9, you just created a token, which, if you remember, because I've discussed that in lesson 9, it's an access card. But you need to know that the access card can be used to store information if it's a non-opaque one, and it needs to be validated by the resource server, and you will see that the validation is done through the signature. Signature that, by the way, the resource server, and I will repeat that in the next lessons when we discuss that, the signature, see the key ID should be exactly this one here. So 3C1EC and so on, 3C1EC and so on. So this is how the token is linked to the key pair, and this is how, after the token has been generated, you can see here we generated the token, then someone, if someone would like to validate this token through the key ID, they know what is the key pair, they get the public part, and they will be able to validate the signature. And that's how we make sure that the token hasn't been changed. I will go into more details in the next lessons for that. So is the more generally used token type in JVT? Yes, the answer is yes. In 90+% of cases, we do use JVTs. There are opaque tokens as well, and the authorization server that we just created here can be configured to use opaque tokens as well. So opaque tokens can be used also with the authorization server, but if you use an opaque token, you will not have a signature, and there is a different way in which you validate an opaque token, which is usually using an introspection endpoint. So that's how it works. So no, it's not more for demonstration purposes. Opaque tokens are also can be used, but yeah, it's basically a different way to simply create the flow. So OAuth 2 doesn't tell you what kind of token you should use. So you can use opaque tokens, and they are used, but usually today, again, in 90% case of the 90% of the cases, JVTs are used rather than opaque tokens. Maybe when I will create the example of the opaque tokens, then we can discuss about a comparison between the approaches, and you will see there are basically differences and advantages and disadvantages. So why the key source needs to create a security context as generic parameter? I have no idea actually why they created it like this, Alexander, so sorry for that. I don't have that information, and to be honest, I don't really even care. So somewhere behind the scenes they needed this security context as a generic type. I can ask if you want, because I know the guys who work on this stuff, but I'm not sure how much relevant this is. Will we have a course on private public key with OAuth 2 and Spring Security 5? Spring Security 5, this is Spring Security 6. If you want to have it with Spring Security 5, you can watch my Spring Security 2020 playlist. So that's where I have already discussed at that time how to create a resource server and an authorization server with Spring Security 5. Now we are using Spring Security 6 since I'm using the latest and the greatest. So I hope that makes sense. So yes, we demonstrated with this that we ended up with getting the token. So our simplest flow did work correctly, and we really managed to get an access token. We got also an ID token because we used OpenID Connect, but we managed to demonstrate what at least I wanted to demonstrate for today. In the next lessons, I will continue showing you a little bit more like how can you use redirected as localhost? Very good question, actually, as that's what I was going to say exactly when I saw your question in the chat. Yes, you can, but you have to create a custom validator for the authorization code. We can try to do that in the next lesson. You can customize also the token itself. You can use introspection tokens. So there are plenty of features that are hidden behind this 1.0.0 implementation. So we can literally go through it and understand everything out of it. Let's, however, end this for today, because I'm going to spend enough time in the next lessons to show you all the other details. Is OAuth2 Authorization Server a replacement for Keycloak? No, it isn't. Keycloak is a product, while the authorization server from Spring is a framework. So they are two different things. Could you try using localhost in redirect URI? Yes, I will. I will try to do that in the next lesson if you want. They didn't fix it because it's nothing to fix in there. So again, localhost by specification cannot be used. So by the OpenID specification, redirect URI should not be localhost. So the reason it doesn't work out of the box is not because it is a bug in this resource, in this authorization server framework, is because it's meant to be like this. But if you really want, you can make a validator, a custom validator, which is pretty simple to create. I will show you again in details next time because we don't have now time, but the idea is that it's really simple. So you just have to call the authorization endpoint here, and then you can go through the authentication providers, and for each authentication provider you can add a custom validator, and in the custom validator you can just create your custom validator where you don't skip over localhost. So it's very easy to do, but it's not a bug. So because you say, did they fix it? There's nothing to fix in there. That's the way it should work. Normally, localhost by specification, you can read that in the RFC if you don't believe me, it shouldn't work. Can you make this authorization server framework work with localhost? Yes, you can do that by creating your custom authorization code request validator. And in the next lesson, most likely I will show you in detail, like we will code that to see how to do. Cool. Super. So that being said, guys, I'm really gonna close it now. I hope that this lesson was useful and you learned something new here. Thank you very much for being here with me and being so active as usual, and and asking so many questions. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time, and next time most likely we'll discuss about JVT customization and implementing a custom validator for your authorization request, and then further maybe we go into OPAC tokens as well. With that being said, I'm saying goodbye, waving my hand, and thanks again. Cheers everyone.